How's it going? And welcome to episode 143 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter at On the Wire Pod. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me at 80Great. That's all spelled out. And Kevin Hasting is at Hasting Kevin on the Twitter. And Kevin, glad to be back once again. And we last episode that we did together, sprinkled in a little mock draft episode that I did with Nick Pollock on Sunday. But since that, I'm like, all right, we're going to clean up. We're going to catch up. We're going to get to all this news, get it out of the way, get it off our plate. And lo and behold, we could do a whole nother news and notes episode if we really wanted to. There's enough to talk about. Lots going on. How you doing?
Oh, doing great, and trying to keep on as much of this as possible. It seems like it's slowed down. I really thought once Ohtani signed, we'd see more of a flood of moves, and we haven't. Like you said, there's been a lot of moves, but some of the bigger names, Blake Snell, Cody Bellinger, Yamamoto, of course, and then we're getting conflicting reports. It could be after Christmas, even after
that was
the New
just
Year,
annoying.
where his deadline's the 4th, right? So we know we're going to see Yamamoto by January 4th. Maybe that's one more piece we need to see drop before the floodgates really open on the rest of these guys. But yeah, like you said, with the second, third tier moves, there's still a lot more news. It's been awesome.
Yeah, and it'll be the first thing on our docket, but your Royals are making the most of them.
Love it.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that and a whole bunch more in just a second. And since there is so much to talk about, we brought in a special guest. Joining us today is our co-overall, and it is weird to have to say co-overall, but we'll get to that in a little bit as well, champion of our 2023 Listener Leagues. That is Adam Lazarus. Adam, thanks for joining us, man. It's been a long time. We've been trying to get you on all offseason and finally got you on here.
No, like I told you guys earlier, thanks for having me on and for having the listener leagues. I mean, I think that's great. I appreciate it. It certainly gives me a great opportunity to learn how to structure teams and things like that. And I appreciate the opportunity you guys put out. Yeah,
well, we're glad to have you. You've already jumped in 2 of our listener leagues this season as well. Both are 12-teamers, right? You haven't done the 15-teamer yet, though.
No. That changes the whole landscape of all.
Oh, it does.
Changes everything.
Kevin, you're still sitting in the lobby waiting to fill that second 15-teamer as we get closer and closer to Christmas. By the time you're listening to this, it'll be Christmas Eve. Hopefully, we are starting to draft that. I told Kevin off air that if we get to 14 and we need the 15th, I will put my pride aside and I will jump in that one. But it's tough filling all these fab leagues early because people aren't used to doing these kind of drafts before New Year's. It happens once, but usually we see everything on Twitter is filled with DC draft boards. Now, of course, the Gladiator draft boards are more popular. Some best balls in there as well. But I've said it a bunch of times and I'll say it again. Like, I'm a big proponent now of drafting your fab leagues early and then holding off on your draft and hold until you have more information. And you can make a little bit more informed decisions on 50 rounds worth of players. Kevin, I don't know how you're feeling about that kind of switch in mentality.
No, I agree. Yeah, because you can fix your mistakes.
Yep.
Theoretically,
and there will be mistakes.
Hopefully, you can fix your mistakes prior to the season beginning, but you can at least not take zeros in spots. You can definitely fix them to that extent. So I agree. The fab leagues earlier, a lot of people talk about those that do draft early enjoy getting values on players that they're on. Not everybody else is yet. And then that changes as we get closer to opening day of the regular season. But if it doesn't work out, if there are injuries, if there are roster changes, you can adjust prior to the season even starting. NFBC does that first fab run the weekend before the season starts. So that's amazing.
Yeah, you have players who retire or they go overseas. I may or may not have drafted Trevor May in the first October league, just like a day before he announced his retirement. We'll see. We'll find out on the first FAB period if that's true statement or not, because he will be dropped if it is true. But you, like you said, yeah, you can fix those mistakes. All right, like I said at the start of the show, we have a ton to talk about in news, and then we do want to talk about some results from our first two 12-team listener leagues that the second one just finished up. Adam's done both of those. I've done both of those. Kevin, you were in the first one, so it's nice you'll be able to see some data from a draft you didn't actually compete in. But before we do that, let's get to a lot of this news. And Kevin, of course, we're going to do what is probably going to become our weekly Royal Roundup here. A whole bunch of moves by Kansas City. I'm going to list them off. I want to get your take on all of them. First and foremost, they add to their rotation with Michael Wacha signing a 2-year deal with the Royals. They do a bunch of stuff in their outfield, namely signing Hunter Renfroe to what is ultimately a 1-year deal with the player option. What I don't get about this, I'm just going to jump to this, is the difference between calling it a player option and an opt-out clause. I'm pretty sure they're exactly the same thing, just a weird terminology, especially for a 1-year thing. It's a player option. I'm calling it a player option. I don't care what any of the tweets say. It's a player option for 2025. But then on top of that, they add to their outfield with Renfroe, but then they got rid of Edward Olivares. And they didn't just send him to Omaha this time. They sent him to Pittsburgh. And so they traded Edward Olivares to the Pirates. We'll see how the Pirates handle him. He is out of options, so that transfers over with the Pirates. Pirates can't send him to Indianapolis. On top of that, a smaller move, Kansas City, they traded Taylor Clarke, reliever, to Milwaukee for Cam Devaney and reliever Ryan Brady. Not sure if there's anything there, Kevin, but overall, start where you want, but like, what are your Royals doing right now?
Well, I'm going to start with Taylor Clarke, simply because, yes, he has shown flashes. He's also been bad at times. This was a move to clear 40-man roster spot for Hunter Renfroe. Mm-hmm. So we can get that one out of the way. Getting a couple players back in return is awesome. I don't think the previous Royals front office may have pulled that off. And, you never know with some of these guys. It's worth taking a shot on a couple of minor leaguers that may end up panning out in the future. In future years, I think Kansas City would have just DFA'd Taylor Clarke. So it's nice. They get something back, and it may or may not amount to anything, but that's what that move was about. Michael Wacha, much like Seth Lugo, I think he is someone that can perform very well in Kauffman Stadium. We've seen it with Vargas in the past. That's been a few years ago now, but Nick Pollock brings it up all the time. Kauffman Stadium's a great place for pitchers to pitch, especially if they have had home run issues. It's the ballpark plays up for runs, but it plays down for home runs. So if home run issues have been a thing for you, it can really help. And the thing with me is there's been a lot of Royals fans, and I know you should never read the comments, but Royals fans, they're so pessimistic about these deals. However, fan bases of other teams have been with both the Seth Lugo and the Michael Wacha signings. Why did we not outbid the Royals on this player? So that's encouraging, and I like this. Hunter Renfroe, I am a huge Hunter Renfroe fan, and his 2023 was not good. I think he bounces back. I really do. I think he's been an above average outfielder for quite some time now, ever since he was with Boston. Is that 3 seasons ago now, Adam?
That's 2021. He was with Boston for all of 2021. Yeah.
And I remember all season long writing my Fab article every week and looking at the roster ship. And Hunter Renfroe just nobody bought into what he was doing, and he just kept doing it. And he did it for about 3 seasons. 2023, not so much. I like the bounce back here. I think Edward Olivares becomes more of an option in fantasy now that he's in Pittsburgh. He's probably playing nearly every day, more than a platoon player. Maybe not every day, but more than a platoon player. And so I think I'm more interested in Edward Olivares now as well. But as a Royals fan, like I tweeted Joe Orico, our friend of the show, friend of mine. He's Sports Ethos, and he does daily podcast, Fantasy MLB Today, and he has been ragging on these moves by the Royals. They're not that great. These players aren't that great. And I'm like, Joe, we're the Royals, man. This is
we don't have to be that great.
5 seasons, right? A rumor that Shohei Ohtani is on a plane to Kansas City will never fly. Like, this is something for us to get excited about. So stop ragging on my 2024 AL Championship Royals, AL Central champions so much here in the offseason.
Well, if nothing else, I'm just holding on to the fact that Hunter Renfroe just keeps growing and growing his value in Immaculate Grid. If nowhere else, this will be.
It's also interesting. It appears he's wearing number 16. At least he did that in his video that's been making the rounds when he was on MLB Network a day or two ago. And that's Bo Jackson and Billy Butler, two big time Royals players. So he's got to perform. Right?
That's some big shoes. I know. I'm like, why you put yourself in those shoes? Oh man. All right. Well, we'll see if he lasts more than a season, because he hasn't lasted more than a season since his first team with the Padres. Since 2019, he's played for 7 different teams. All right. So that's a lot going on in Kansas City. Let's move over to the World Series champions, the Texas Rangers, Adam. We got a couple of, injuries. One, they signed an already injured pitcher with Tyler Mahle to a 2-year deal, who, of course, went through Tommy John surgery last May. He would be probably expected to return by the end of the season if all things go well. But they will be also getting back around that time Max Scherzer, who underwent his own surgery to repair a herniated disc in his back. He's expected to be out until at least the All-Star break, recovering from that. Are we more interested in the fact that we might see some different faces in the first half of the year in the rotation for Texas that you might be eyeing in these drafts to take advantage of the extra time on the mound, or are we looking to actually stash either one of these guys, thinking that they're going to come back with any kind of value?
I think Tyler Mahle interests me. At this point, Max Scherzer is not somebody I would look at, because I just feel like he's in a situation where he's continuously breaking down. Mm-hmm. The Rangers, the one thing that I would say coming off their World Series win is they're a little light in the starting pitching staff. There are still some question marks whether they can sign back Jeff Montgomery. That would help. That would be one of the keys. But as far as from a standpoint of fantasy, who would I target? I think Tyler Mahle be one of those players in a draft and hold leagues where you go in 50 rounds, where you target for the back half of this of after the All-Star break. He'd be somebody I'd be interested in. But as far as Max Scherzer is concerned, he's just breaking down too much to put any type of commitment on, both even if from a standpoint of fantasy or just from a franchise standpoint. That's going to look like a bad deal for that franchise, even though they won a World Series.
I mean, that I was just going to say, like, they won the World Series. And there's no deal that looks bad, like fully bad. It's like the ring, you'll always wear the ring, the pennants fly forever, all those cliches. But yeah, as far as like giving up Luis Angel Acuna and everybody else that they might have given up for that, basically 2 months of Max Scherzer, who actually spent some time injured at the end of the year before the playoffs as well.
The deal that's going to look bad for them is the Chapman deal.
Well,
because
Cole that already looks bad.
Yeah, because Cole Hagans would change a lot on the front of that rotation.
That was he's the ace
Royals,
in Kansas City right now.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, one of the things that like the Royals have struggled with as a franchise is the selection of young pitchers in the draft. Okay, you have Brady Singer. They exposed Asa Lacy in the Rule 5 draft. And now they actually struck gold, provided he could stay healthy. And, the Rangers, they were going for broke. I mean, I have to believe they knew what they were doing, but Cole Hagans at the second half of last year was about as dominating of a left-hand pitcher as there was in baseball.
I know. It's like they went off and said, hey, we need a hard-throwing left-handed reliever for our playoff push. And they went off and got Chapman, but they traded away a left-handed, much better pitcher in the process. All right. Well, let's see. I'm just, I see Max Scherzer and I want to be like, oh, look at that. The Mets are making, oh, that's right. No, the Mets still aren't making moves, but we'll get to one of those a little bit later. Kevin, our boy, Matt Carpenter on the move. He gets the Max Stassi treatment. He gets the Marco Gonzalez treatment, getting traded to Atlanta. He was expected to be traded. Atlanta actually announced, yes, we plan on trading him again. And apparently they couldn't find a buyer, so they just outright cut him. So he has been cut. He is a free agent. Can Matt Carpenter actually latch on anywhere this offseason and repeat the magic we saw when he signed with New York, where we thought, he was actually going to, hit 40 home runs in 40 days?
It was looking like it. He had a 727 slugging in 2022. That is insane.
And how many games? It was like, it ended up only being like 20 games.
47 games. Sorry, yeah. So small sample, but not so small that you should be able to spike a 720
over a month. Yeah, sure.
Right. We're not going to see that again. Obviously we're not going to see anything close to it. And I think it's possible that he could latch on somewhere, but he's 38 years old. Unfortunately, I don't think he's going to be fantasy relevant other than in an only league wherever he ends up signing, unless it's somewhere that's going to put him in the lineup as a full-time designated hitter, but I really don't even know if that exists. So unfortunately, no to answer your question, but it's still fun to talk about Matt Carpenter.
Yeah, always. All right. Adam, we got a returnee, I guess, to an extent, Lourdes Gurriel Jr. He signs a 4-year, ultimately an extension with Arizona, as he spent last year with him, and after being traded from Toronto, in the Gabriel Moreno trade and what have you. He did pretty well for himself overall with his new team down in the Southwest. 24 home runs, 261 average, a little bit down from what we've seen him in Toronto, but still put up some decent counting stats. Overall seemed pretty comfortable. Obviously, by the way of this contract, he's pretty comfortable in Arizona, in that outfield. Are you seeing good things in the fact that he liked where he was? He's going to sign 4 more years, and they're gonna put him to work.
When I first saw Lourdes Gurriel pop up, one of the things when we were doing the first couple of fantasy drafts, the first thing that came to mind when I was going through it around the 5th or 6th round is I said, man, the outfield the depth of players in the outfield is awful. So, and I said, what mistake did I make here in my drafting? Because I think that's one of the things that's good about drafting early, is because now you're getting educated on ADP, where players are going. Lourdes Gurriel is a type of player that at the end of the year, when you start matching up rosters of fantasy owners that have won championships, he's on the team. He goes late in the draft. I just pulled up the Fantasy Pros rankings because I knew you guys were going to talk about it. Gurriel is in this bunch. And tell me who, and it's an interesting bunch, actually. Riley Green, Stephen Kwan, Chas McCormick, Kerry Carpenter, then Gurriel. I mean, I could go to sleep knowing that Gurriel is going to hit 25 home runs, drive in 90, and maybe have about 8 to 12 stolen bases.
I mean, I think the worry I have with Gurriel in where he is now, where he's going to be for the next 4 years, is where is he going to end up in that lineup on a regular basis? Roster Resources got him in the 7th spot right now. So if he's in the bottom third of that order, I'm going to have a hard time believing he's going to drive in 90. Now, if he can inch his way up even to the 6 or the 5 spot, even somewhat regularly, yeah, I'll jump on board with that for sure. But of that group you just told me, he's, in my opinion, the most well-rounded player of that group that you just threw out there in that little tier. He's just not the one that I want to be stuck with as my outfield one. And to your what you're talking about, if you all of a sudden you just forget that the depth of outfield is not as deep as you would like it to be. And we've talked about this last year too. Last year felt the same way, Kevin. I don't know if you remember or not, or feel the same way, but I did. I don't want to be stuck holding the bag and be like, all of a sudden, oh no, Lourdes Gurriel Jr. is my first outfielder. And now, the question marks revolve around who my 2, 3, 4, and 5 are in a 5 outfield league.
Yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing is his ADP hasn't really moved since his signing. I think some of it is, he's not one of the big names. Some of it is people probably expected him to go back to Arizona. So that's as he was being drafted. And yeah, like Adam said, in this range, Starling Marte, injury concerns, Jack Sawinski, huge streaks of good and bad. Whit Merrifield, Gavin Lux has outfield eligibility. Luis Rengifo. When we start looking at the names going around him in drafts, he's the safest.
Oh, sure.
And that seems weird talking about it at that point in a draft. At that point in a draft, lots of times we're looking for upside. But with the depth of outfield not really being there for leagues where you start 5 outfielders, in 10 and 12 team points or head-to-head leagues on Yahoo and ESPN, and those are the most popular leagues out there. Lourdes Gurriel probably isn't that appealing, but in 5 outfielder roto leagues, Lourdes Gurriel at this point in a draft looks like a bargain to me.
Sure. I will say, I correct myself. It's not a 4-year deal. It's a 3-year deal. He does have an opt-out after the 2nd year, and there is a team option for that 4th year. So it could end up being a 4-year deal. But at 3 years, $42 million, he's also going to play. I mean, this was a question we had about the Arizona outfield going into last season, the depth, the guys that are coming up, obviously Corbin Carroll, Alec Thomas, and all that, and Jake McCarthy, and others. I think that this kind of a contract guarantees him at the very least, 6 out of 7 day work weeks on a full slate. So
yeah, because he got a lot of DH time last season because Ketel Marte was healthy, and and Marte seems to be healthy now, and that's probably going to be the case this season as well.
Okay. All right, let's get back to the pitching side, Kevin. We got a 1-year deal added to the Detroit rotation. Detroit is just stacking up that rotation, and I don't know if stacking is the right word here, but at least they are bringing in veterans or experienced pitchers to kind of take the place of some of these young guys that we're some of us might be excited about, some of us just might be interested in. Instead, we got Kenta Maeda signing with them somewhat recently. Now they add Jack Flaherty to a 1-year, probably like a 1-year prove it deal type of thing that he wanted to take so that he could go somewhere, play an entire season or maybe half a season if Detroit ends up trading him at the deadline to kind of show, hey, I'm worth it. I can get that long-term deal, yada, yada, yada. But while he's in Detroit on this $14 million deal, which, obviously you're going to be putting him in his rotation and he's going to be going out there every 5th or 6th day. Are you having any interest in that ballpark with with that team around him and in the situation that he finds himself in.
Well, Flaherty was signed just before the Royals signed Michael Wacha, and the Royals had been rumored on being in on Jack Flaherty. And when I saw the tweet, Jack Flaherty has signed, I was please no. I have zero interest in Jack Flaherty. I mean, 2021, he was okay, but he way overperformed his underlying metrics. He's got this reputation based on 2019, and deservedly so. He was amazing in 2019. And in 2019, we were talking all about hitters, and he had 196 innings of a 2.75 ERA when everybody was sending the ball sailing out of ballparks. However, he hasn't been good since. And I had zero interest in the Royals obtaining him. I have zero interest on my fantasy teams. I will not draft him. We say there's a price on everybody. There's not a price on Jack Flaherty for me. I'd rather have Brian Abreu, Matt Brash. I'd rather have a reliever in my lineup than Jack Flaherty. So I didn't pay much attention once I was ecstatic that it was not the Royals that signed him.
Fair enough. All right, guys. We have a few more things we need to touch on as far as news goes, but we got to do our quick break real quick. All right, we are back. We're going to get right back into it, Adam. We got some news out of LA. Of course, all the big news comes out of LA nowadays. They make a pretty big trade with the Tampa Bay Rays, acquiring Tyler Glasnow in a very rare in baseball. Basically, it was a sign and trade. You don't really see a whole lot of this in baseball, but they made the trade with the caveat that they would be able to negotiate a extension with the starter. And if they weren't able to come to an agreement, then the trade would fall through. They did. He signs a 5-year contract extension with the Dodgers. That'll keep Glasnow on the West Coast for quite some time. Along with Glasnow, the Dodgers get Manny, Margot headed to their outfield. And Tampa Bay, in return, gets a pitcher and an outfielder of their own, outfielder Jonny DeLuca, and then Ryan Pepiot presumably added to the Tampa Bay rotation. So you start on either end of this that you like, but what's your overall take on these guys, especially the pitchers in their new environments?
Glasnow as a pitcher. Now let's think that there's no such thing as the word injury. Injuries
turn injuries off. Yeah, we'll turn injuries off.
Turn injuries off. He's a top 15 pitcher. He has huge strikeout numbers. He's going to a team like the Dodgers that has been. I trust the Dodgers. When the Dodgers make moves, when Andrew Friedman and his staff make moves, I look at it. Mm-hmm. That goes back to like what I think with certain general managers, where I look at the moves that they make. Now, the Dodgers, from a pitching standpoint, they're still a little light. They have a lot riding on Bobby Miller. Okay, because he's got to come through for them. They've had some issues. Listen, they lost Julio Urias. He's not going to be back there. Bad signing with Trevor Bauer. So now you have a situation with Glasnow, who could be a dominating force. Hey, listen, the Dodgers didn't have great pitching last year, Adam. And what'd they do? They had one of the best records, if not the best records in baseball. So I still think that they're in on Corbin Burns. They have enough kids on the farm that can help the Brewers get back to respectability quicker. And I think he's the next pitcher on the trading block that somebody will be looking to acquire. I don't know if it's either him, Dylan Cease. The Dodgers aren't done. They need to add one more pitcher to that rotation. But Glasnow is one of those guys somewhere between the 4th and 6th round in fantasy that you have to take a look at.
Sure. I mean, the Dodgers have a lot of options still. There's still plenty of, honestly, the potential aces on the free market. Never, obviously you have Cy Young, a winner, Blake Snell. They still have Imanaga and Yamamoto coming over from Japan that haven't been signed yet. I think that, Corbin Burns, Dylan Cease is also a trade option that, has been rumored about throughout the offseason. I think that if I'm the Dodgers, more than likely I'm spending the money that I, that I have the luxury of spending on the talent that just happens to be freely out there, rather than giving up, going out and giving up the stock capital that I have in my farm system, which honestly isn't as strong as it once was, especially on the pitching side. They're going to want to hold on to every one of those guys so that they have the ability to apply Dodgeritis to the players that they have to. Be able to control those innings.
The one thing I would say, Adam, about the Dodgers, you just hit it on the head. The Dodgers have been known for years for having a great farm system. Mm-hmm. But because of last year, they had to expose a lot of young players like Michael Busch and who were dominating in the minor leagues. And when they came up to the major leagues, they didn't perform. And I remember when I was growing up in New York had these great Mets young players that were being publicized. Do you remember those days? Billy Pulsifer, Paul Wilson. These were guys that were supposed to be superstars. Mm-hmm. And it just never happens. And in the Dodgers case, they exposed some of their younger players last year, and I think their value got squashed a little bit. So I think that's one of the things that I look at with, like, what do they have available to go after players with? Because that farm system did get exposed.
Yeah, and what they have is money. So that's that's where I go.
People to take these contracts and a great TV deal.
That's true. That's a good point. Like, you can purchase existing contracts with not so great talent from your farm system if you're just willing to take on the contracts.
It's like what the Mets did last year.
Yeah, I mean, it's what Atlanta's been doing, except they're finding other buyers on most of these players. Yeah. Didn't happen with Carpenter. On the other side, though, I mean, you talk about teams that you trust with pitching or making moves in general. With the Dodgers, I mean, Tampa Bay is on that short list, especially when it comes to pitchers. It's like Tampa Bay makes a move, and you just assume that the other team made the wrong move at this point. So, Ryan Pepiot, are you excited about the fact that, obviously Tampa was targeting him, or at least they were able to, make this trade with Pepiot being part of that deal?
Let me rewind the tape back to you guys and ask you both what you thought of this. When the Rays signed Zach Eflin last year for a lot of money, what was your initial thought? What type of pitcher did you think Zach Eflin was before last year?
I mean, I knew what kind of pitcher he was before last year in Philadelphia, and it wasn't anything special. Yeah. But when Tampa Bay makes that move, and they get, not even the move that Tampa Bay made, you knew from the amount of money that a club like Tampa Bay was willing to give its individual player, like they gave in years in the contract length. I was fairly confident that Eflin, and I think, Kevin, you and I talked about this, like, we are confident that Eflin was going to be more of a workhorse than he had ever been before, and Tampa Bay was going to allow him to run with it. And he did, obviously. It's easy to say in hindsight. But yeah, that's how I felt about it.
That's how I feel about Ryan Pepiot. Like, if you were doing a draft Champions League and stuff like that, and you're into that 25th, 30th round, if you can get him, he's one of those guys you gobble up because the Rays like him.
Yeah, that's fair.
And there's the advantage, right? There's a handful of teams we feel this way about in developing pitching, and not just developing pitching, but then in enhancing the pitching that they do have once they are at the big league level. The Dodgers are one of them. And now to Tampa, a second one. That's just more information Pepiot's going to get, right? He's going to have had the advantage of getting the development of the Dodger system and then the 40-some innings at the major league level with them, and now go to Tampa and see what they have to say as well. Not many pitchers have had that opportunity.
Yeah. Not arbitration eligible until 2026, free agent not until 2029. So he will be with Tampa for quite a while. I do worry. The only thing with Tampa I worry about is how many innings are they going to provide him with? What kind of implementation are they going to have on holding him back, especially in these first two pre-arbitration years that he's with the club. He only had, last year, due to, various reasons, 64 and 2/3 innings. Before that, in 2022, he did hit up to around 145 innings on the season. So he's stretched out. He can do that as long as he can stay healthy, and they give him a rotation spot throughout the course of the season. I just wonder how, what's going to end up happening as far as the way that Tampa Bay has had a track record with younger pitchers, not as established pitchers, in how many innings that they are willing to, throw out there in any given start. So I guess I'm worried about the wins is really when I get down to it, because Kevin, you got to worry about the wins.
Yes.
All right. Let's go, Kevin. We got a couple of relievers signed. One of them early in the week, and one just I saw the notes come through today. Both on the West Coast here. Oakland, they filled their Trevor quota by signing Trevor Gott to a 1-year deal, and they're as Trevor May leaves, so they have to get another Trevor, obviously. And then San Diego, who is presumably losing Josh Hader, not going to bring him back, more than likely, more so for monetary reasons, less so for, talent reasons. But they bring in Yuki Matsui. He signs a 4-year deal with the Padres. Of these two, who's most likely to get regular saves, as neither team really has a set closer?
Oh, it's Matsui. It's Matsui by a lot, I believe. This is why they signed him. San Diego, in my opinion, they signed him to be the closer. That's pretty rare for somebody, whether it be a young player or a player coming from overseas. It's not something we see often, but I am interpreting this as they signed Matsui to be the closer. Right now on their roster resource page, their bullpen had 2 saves last season. Now we know that's because Josh Hader's gone, but also, it's not like there's somebody there with experience and you always bring up the arbitration, Adam. He signed a 4-year deal. There is no arbitration.
No,
right?
there's not.
So that's not going to be a factor. So I think it's Matsui by a lot. Trevor Gott might have been of some interest until we got the news that Mason Miller is probably going to relieve. And if he's going to be a reliever, I think he's most definitely their closer. Also, how many games are the Oakland A's going to win? So, it's Matsui pretty easy for me. I think he's going to skyrocket up draft boards because I think most fantasy players are going to agree that he probably is the guy in San Diego.
I mean, Matsui has the closing experience from his time in Japan. I think he had 30 saves last year for his club over there. I'm just assuming that Oakland is not paying attention and their management is just going to be like, oh, it's the 9th inning, put Trevor out there. So that's what I'm running with. So I won't be surprised. Nothing will surprise me except for wherever they end up playing baseball. So we still don't know that for sure. I believe that they actually don't have a contract.
That's something to keep in mind in keeper and dynasty leagues, because if they do end up playing their games in Las Vegas AAA ballpark for a year or two, the home runs are going to be crazy. For guys we don't see home runs from. So that's something to keep in mind if you're in keeper and dynasty leagues. You might want to actually start stashing some Oakland Athletics.
Yeah. Yeah. Remember, I mean, when the Blue Jays ended up playing in Dunedin and Buffalo, they couldn't play in Toronto. We talked about that a lot, and it, obviously played a factor, but no, playing in a minor league park in Las Vegas in the PC, basically in the PC, let's just put everybody back in the PCL. No. That'll be I don't even know what that'll be. All right. Some moves from Milwaukee, guys. I'm gonna lump these two together and get both your takes on this part. The Milwaukee Brewers are making deals not for Corbin Burnes here yet. Instead, they are actually trading 4 players. They're signing Eric Haase to a 1-year deal. I think it was interesting that they announced him as a catcher, straight catcher. I'm curious to know what kind of role he ends up with with the Brewers. But then they trade away, not Corbin Burnes. They trade away Adrian Hauser and Tyrone Taylor to the New York Mets. New York Mets finally making a move here. Adam, let's start with you here. What kind of with Tyrone Taylor obviously leaving there, there's some spot open up in the rotation or even in the outfield. But do you see Eric Haase being able to ignite anything back when we saw him, become fantasy relevant for a decent amount of time, basically a full season, as he gained catcher eligibility?
I just see him as a backup to William Contreras. I don't see. Obviously the other missing piece is David Stearns, the new Mets general manager, knows these guys with Milwaukee, who he picked up in that trade. But in regards to, with Haase, I just see limit. I don't see any upside. I see a good clubhouse guy, that type of thing to fill out a roster. That's what I see. I don't see anything that made me stop and say, hey, look what they're doing over here. I think Milwaukee's in a situation where they're going to try to do as much as they can to rebuild their farm system. They have Jackson Chirios coming up very soon, if not right out of spring training. So I think that's what they're looking at. I think they have an interesting manager that spent time at Notre Dame, then spent time as the bench manager for Craig Counsell. So they're an interesting team for the future, but I don't see anything with that move. Nothing fantasy relevant.
Kevin, I heard all the rumors that Milwaukee was basically willing to trade anything not nailed down. Is this the start of that, the way you're looking at it? Are you expecting more moves to kind of trickle in? And then what's your thoughts on Hauser and Taylor being in New York, especially as Adam pointed out with the familiarity that Stearns has with those players?
I'm going to start with the Mets. I think they need both these guys. So I think we're going to get the innings from Hauser and the at-bats from Tyrone Taylor. And roster resource has him hitting ninth, but even hitting ninth, you're going to get 550 plate appearances if he plays every day, which as the roster stands now, Tyrone Taylor will play every day. And that makes him a 2020 threat. I know the stolen bases didn't really come along until 2023, but there's a reason for that. So, he only had 240 some plate appearances, 10 home runs, 9 stolen bases. And yes, I do believe in the stolen bases that he had not done in the past with the new rules. So we're looking at a possible 2020 guy here all of a sudden from Tyrone Taylor. Adrian Hauser, I think, goes into the rotation. The Mets don't have a whole lot there. So I like the move for both of those guys. And when Milwaukee, yeah, I think there's still more moves coming. I still think I know the talk in the last couple of days is now they're talking Corbin Burns extension. I just don't see it. He was so upset.
That
over
bridge is gouging. Yeah, it's
so maybe they extend him to make him more valuable in a trade. But
that's a true sign and trade, sure.
Right. But other than that, yeah, I think this is just the beginning. I do think that we're going to see more of these guys leave Milwaukee. I don't think it'll be a full-blown dump everybody. As a Royals fan, I know better than anybody with the new draft rules, the tanking for draft picks doesn't work any longer. Mm-hmm. Right? In 2022, the Royals had the third worst record in baseball, and they picked 8th in the draft. In 2023, they had the second worst record in baseball, and they picked 6th in the draft due to this new draft lottery. So it's not a guarantee. Tanking isn't what it was when the Astros did it, the Cubs did it, the Royals did it back to get their 2015 World Series championship. So that I don't think we're going to see teams completely dump everybody unless they're Oakland any longer.
Well, even Oakland, I was so happy to see Oakland not get a top pick in this draft for the exact reasons you talked about. Cleveland,
right?
More power to you. Happy to have you at the top of the draft.
Yeah, the Royals had the second worst record in baseball, and two teams in their division are picking ahead of them in the draft. So it's that. This is, I'm not complaining about it. I think it could be good for baseball. I think that has a lot to do with the moves the Royals have made. They're not anything huge, but they're a whole lot more than we've seen in recent years from the Royals, and I think maybe this is. Gosh, man, I've had to say this quite a bit over the past few months. Unfortunately, I got to give Rob Manfred some props here.
Oh, and you do not have to keep saying that. You are under no obligation to repeat that statement. Yeah, I mean, as far as Milwaukee goes, you know me. I'm just crossing my fingers that this gives a little bit more of an avenue for Aaron Ashby to, fight his way back into the rotation through spring training. I mean, he's fighting Colin Ray and Joe Ross as their 4 or 5. So just saying.
I used to love Joe Ross, and he just never stayed healthy.
All right, guys, that's all the news that was fit to print. So we are going to move on here. Talk to Adam a little bit about how he won our 2023 Listener League overall championship, got the Yoo-hoo shower, as NFBC denotes. We're going to talk about that and much more right after this. All right, we are back. Of course, you were still listening to On the Wire. I am Adam Howe, joined as always by Kevin Hasting. And today we are speaking with Adam Lazarus. Adam is our co-champion of our 2023. All of those were 12-teamers. So it was into all the leagues. I think we had 10 last year, Kevin, of our listener leagues based on the NFBC. We are filling them as we speak. Throughout the course of the 2023-2024 offseason going into the 2024 season. So if you're interested in joining one of them with us, please shoot us a DM on Twitter, join the PL Discord and find us out there as well. You can do that by joining PL Plus. Got to give that plug out there as well. But we hopefully, Kevin, we can get this 15-teamer that you're sitting in drafting by Christmas. We said that at Thanksgiving. Unfortunately, the 15s are a little bit harder to fill than the 12s, obviously. But get in there, guys. Get in there. It's only $50. Super easy, super approachable, and get your fab practice in before the new year's as you start practicing for your other 15-team fab leagues in March, like the main event and stuff like that. But Adam, let's hear a little bit more about yourself. We talked a little bit, before we start recording, but let everybody know a little bit more about yourself, your history playing fantasy baseball, how you got into it, all that standard bio stuff that everybody, wants to know. If somebody wins an overall championship, they want to know if they kind of back their way into it or if you've been doing, or if you're a ringer. And that's basically the only two options that there are, right?
Yeah. All right. So I played a lot of fantasy baseball growing up. Okay. I graduated. I played college baseball all the way through. I was lucky enough to earn a baseball scholarship to a small Division I school that people used to not know of the name until they beat Michigan in football, but Appalachian State. So I pitched, played all 4 years. I graduated the whole bit. But after I started getting a little bit older, the interest level in fantasy went away and it migrated to something else. And what happened was my family moved to South Florida and I found myself at a racetrack for a thoroughbred racehorses. Well, during that time, I also worked in the technology industry for Xerox selling office equipment. So to make a long story short, I struggled a lot in horse racing from a standpoint. I went from being somebody that was handicapping and betting to becoming a horse owner. Okay. And what happened was, it's a little unique. Everybody likes to ask me, Adam, what was your interest? Why were you interested in thoroughbred racing? And I drew the comparison with thoroughbred racing to fantasy baseball. And my love affair was statistics. So what happened was I drew the parallel and found myself loving the game of horse racing. So I used my acumen of selling and business to create a small business for myself called Pinnacle Racing Stable. It's a horse racing partnership in South Florida where people can buy 2%, 3%, 5% of a horse. It started off with me hanging out flyers at the racetrack, putting ads in the daily racing form, that type of thing. And then I really, really struggled for about, I guess it was 10 horses that I had purchased that did absolutely nothing on the racetrack. And I had one more shot that I wanted to give it before I basically put a pause or quit. On that 11th try, we purchased a horse for $20,000 called Musical Romance. The filly ended up winning what we call the Super Bowl of horse racing, which is called the Breeders' Cup. Mm-hmm. She was a filly, so she could be sold as a broodmare. The filly ended up winning $1.6 million, and I sold her for $1.6 million. And that was my jump into thoroughbred racing. Where I got more involved in the fantasy end of things was right on the front end of COVID.
Okay.
I had a lot of time on my hands, and I started saying, whatever happened with fantasy baseball? Let me go to Barnes & Noble. Let me pick up the fantasy baseball magazines. Let me start up. Now, during this time, I've always followed baseball, but I did not. I mean, my love affair with baseball goes back to being a guy that subscribed to Baseball America, knowing all these younger players and everything like that. And it just grew. Now, my fantasy situation now is it's at a very high point. I play every sport. To tell you how addicted I am to fantasy, I play fantasy NASCAR. That's crazy. But
I dabbled. I did a year of fantasy NHL hockey, like 15 years ago, and I couldn't bring myself to renew the league. Unfortunately, sorry, hockey fans.
Now there is so much information that's out there with fantasy baseball, and good information. You have projections. You have guys that specialize in dynasty. You can know about the younger players. I mean, it's become a hobby that is so addicting. And you want to know something that's really nice to win, but I love having something to look forward to. When I wake up before I go to work and I scroll through all the box scores, I love it. I mean, I'm very passionate about it. And then I like going on the NFBC website and I go to see where's my team, why am I so bad, or how can I sustain myself, those types of things. But I find myself following it. And I've always found myself, I love all the sports, but baseball has always been it for me because I guess maybe because I played it and I know that from an athletic standpoint, you get players of all different types of talent levels, height, weight, that could be stars. And that's not like that in all other sports. And I always can draw my own comparison to baseball and my own past in it. I just have always loved the game. I always loved being on the front end of like seeing a kid. Like this year, for example, I went to a lot of FAU baseball games, and I had no idea that Nolan Chanel, who was their first baseman, would end up in the big leagues after about a month. Yeah. And to see somebody like that as a young player in that and be involved in fantasy, to me, that's what it's all about, where you're following all these kids from college, even high school, to fantasy. And to me, that's what it's all about. Yeah, I love to win because I don't want to constantly be, sending out checks. I like to get something back. Can I just break even? It's sort of like my attitude with horses. I'm not looking to break the bank, but if I can stop writing checks on some of these horses, it'd be a great thing. And that's the same way in terms of fantasy baseball. Can I just break even?
And then I can just keep playing. Yeah.
Yes. Just
absolutely.
Let me keep playing. Let me still potchkey around with my hobby and let me do my thing. Okay. And that's what I did. And that's why I said at the beginning before we came on, I appreciate the listener leagues because it's not a huge amount of money. It's not even about the money. But at this stage of the year where we're off of fantasy football, we're getting close to the end, and I'm still heavily involved in that. But now I'm learning about this year's upcoming fantasy baseball. Like, I'm going to be making mistakes in these drafts that I hope I'm not making in late February and March when I know more about the inventory of players. Where are the players short? Like, where is the depth of talent light? Where would I know that if I don't have a chance? I don't want to go and do these drafts where there's no skin in the game, because then not everybody puts their heart into it. At least some of these, I've already played in 3 gladiator leagues, and it's not about the money. It's about how can I better myself so when it comes in the spring that maybe I do take that chance at playing in one of those higher stakes leagues just to see, where I stand. can I get in the top 3?
Sure.
And that's really, where it is for me. And also, it's about roster construction. Like, what will work this year? What won't work? And I just like playing around. Like if somebody asked me like advice, somebody asked me the other day, how did you do in your fantasy football leagues? I said, I did good, but there were some things I made terrible mistakes on. And I was at lunch and they said, what mistakes did you make? I said, I drafted too many of the same players in too many of my leagues. And I said, I absolutely cannot do that. I got baseball coming up. Like, I'll give you an example. I have a love affair with a couple of players like Austin Riley and Corey Seager. I can't take them in every league. Seager's going to get hurt. Austin Riley will go on a 3-week binge where he's not hitting. But they're both stars. I follow them all the time. But you can't take them in every single league. And
yeah, especially in the first half of your draft. Like, those are the guys you can do that in the back half of your draft. You can go after the same, diamonds, what you see as the diamonds in the rough throughout the course. But yeah, you got to diversify the first half of your draft.
And that's the thing that I have to kind of, be careful about this year. Like, I played a lot of best ball this year in football on Underdog. Mm-hmm. And I just look at it and say, Adam, man, you basically made a lot of mistakes doing it that way. And I said, we can't do that in the other fantasy leagues I play.
There you go. All right. Well, sticking with baseball specifically, you said you've done a couple of gladiators. Obviously, you've done at least 2 fab leagues with us. Since you've gotten back into baseball, which I will echo your sentiment about just the idea of following baseball, I think it makes it easier to do because it is a daily thing. Things change daily, and it is a long grind. It is not, just a 17-week, 18-week thing like in football or whatever. Even basketball, it's like not everybody plays like every other day. Baseball, there's usually, except for Mondays and Thursdays, there are 30 games. There's 15 games being played every single day, and your league and your stats can swing at a moment's notice, especially in like the first half of the season. So I think that's what makes it kind of almost easier to follow because it's constant. If you're not following it, then it takes a lot longer to get back into it. So
it's a grind. It really is. But here's the thing. When you're playing in these leagues, you can grind yourself through hard work and paying attention back into the game. And by using your fab money prudently, not throwing it to the closer that you think maybe that one guy that gets you over the hump, that type of thing. And those are things that you learn. But let me throw you both out of questions because you guys are both doing drafts and stuff like that. What player so far this year, when you looked at your boards, did you see them and go, that's where that guy's going? Like, is there a surprise player that you looked at so far and you go, man, what happened there?
I think the one that stood out, and I think we'll touch on him a little bit later. For me, came this past draft that just finished up, and I think you're alluding to somebody who's probably going a little bit earlier than you would have thought. The name I'm going to say is he went way later than I expected. And that's Echeverry Ruiz. He went like 100 picks lower than what his ADP was listed in that draft room. And it's just one of those things where it's like he just stood at the top of that board. You're waiting for somebody to have messed up and timed out, and then they would get stuck with them, and nobody did. Everybody kept their queue in line most of the time. Is finally he's off the board. Same thing happened with a couple of UT guys in that draft. But the fact that it's like you're in this draft room where you just realize every single person is on the same page with what Ruiz brings to the table, and they're not willing to pay any kind of premium for the single stat, maybe 2 stats that he brings to the table, no matter how extreme that they might be. But his ADP would say otherwise, and so that was the one that kind of got my eyes every time my pick came up, and he was still there, and he was still there, and he was still there. I'm like, oh, okay. I don't know. At the other end, I don't know that like somebody, Kevin, anybody stand out for you?
Yeah, I got one for both ends. To answer your question, Adam, and therefore Adam's question.
I knew that was going to come up at some point.
Yeah, I think Josh Bell is going way later than his projections indicate he should. And I kind of get it, right? It's Miami. It's not the greatest park, but he really performed well in Miami. And we're talking about a conservative 20 home run, 80 RBI guy going near pick 300. I think that's somebody that is going well below the spot where they will actually produce. On the other end, unfortunately, as much as I love watching him play, Elly De La Cruz, right? His ADP in draft champions leagues since mid-November is 18. He has been drafted as high as the 11th player picked off the board. That is insane to me when you look at the players going after him. And I understand that he's exciting, the upside, but and I agree with Scott Chu's been out there quite a bit talking about his rolling charts and how much improvement Elly De La Cruz made towards the end of the season that we may not see in his overall numbers. I get all that. But players going after Elly De La Cruz, Matt Olson, Corey Seager, Austin Riley, Ozzie Albies, Francisco Lindor, all these guys that we can pretty much pencil in what we know we're going to get from them. And most of those numbers are what we're hoping to get from Elly De La Cruz. I mean, I like drafting fun players that I enjoy watching. Unfortunately, I'm probably not going to end up with any Elly De La Cruz.
The guy for me that I saw when I did one of your drafts that I was like, what am I missing here? Was CJ Abrams. And I just saw on Fantasy Pros, they have their rankings and stuff like that. And I looked and I go, CJ Abrams is rated higher than Bo Bichette? No way.
Stolen bases.
It's the stolen base. Yeah.
I mean, that's the one thing I was saying. But, the one thing, since you guys are, you guys do everything with pitcher list and everything. Tell me, both you guys, how do you guys prepare for a draft? How much do you guys rely on projections? And is there somebody in the fantasy baseball sphere who puts out rankings that you kind of zero in on and almost follow them?
I mean, I'll take the low-hanging fruit here. I mean, it's pitching rankings by Nick Pollock. I mean, it's simple. I'll be the shell. But in all actuality, the fact that Nick updates these rankings on the regular, and it's not just like, all right, I put out these rankings and that's it. I'm not making adjustments to them, and that's just how I feel about it. In season, he changes these rankings every week. In the off season, he puts out his really early ones, and then he'll start adjusting those come February, and then on a pretty much regularly up until the season. In the thought that he brings to the table about not only where they're pitching, or how they're pitching, and like what they've pitched in the past, but also just the art of pitching and the way that these pitchers utilize their pitching through sequencing and through their talent level and what have you, puts a lot more faith. I put a lot more faith into what he has to say in that realm. And he'll admittedly say he doesn't care about hitters. He doesn't care about relievers. He's only talking about starters. So those are the rankings I look at. Personally, as far as projections go, I wouldn't say I use projections as a crutch, but I mean, I think we say this enough. Like, there's some really smart people who know what they're doing that I'm going to at very least utilize the base knowledge that they have, based on not only what they're putting out for projections for these players, but also what their track record is. And there's some great articles that get put out every year about, who did the best job in their projections and year over year and stuff like that. And so we'll surely have a couple of guests on that put out some of those projections throughout the course of the off season. But I would definitely reference projections, as they start coming out more so in the spring than I do maybe in these early drafts. Obviously there's not as many of those to go around. But I will definitely be using those, again, not as gospel, not as, stone truth, but definitely I will lean on them a little bit to give me something to jump off from. Kevin?
Yeah, as far as rankings go, I agree 100% on Nick Pollock's rankings at Pitcher List. I told him in my interview, now what's it, 4 years ago now?
There we go.
That I don't pay attention to pitchers. I just do what you tell me to. That's what I told him.
That was 4 years ago. That was before. Yeah.
Like I worry about the hitters and I look at your pitcher rankings, right? But in general, as far as rankings go, because he hasn't done, projections in the past, I am anxious to see the Pitcher List projections using PLV that we'll see probably in February. I'm looking forward to seeing that. In the past, as far as hitters go, I love the fact that the Bat X by Derek Carty incorporates the StatCast data, because I always liked the Bat by Derek Carty anyway, but a few years ago, I've said this many times on the show, Eno Sarah said on a Rates and Barrels podcast one time that none of the projection systems incorporated barrels. And so that was kind of my adjustment to other people's projections that season, was look at their barrel rates and kind of adjust them a little bit. And that was amazing. It worked phenomenally for me that season. That was 2020. And then shortly after, the Bat X comes out. Now we have the StatCast data incorporated into the projections. I still believe, and several people have been saying it recently on other podcasts, that it was true for 2023. I think when I'm looking at starting pitching and projections, Steamer has been more accurate than some of the other projection systems over the past few seasons. And that was definitely true in 2023. And then, you get the composite, right? I love ATC. Brings them all together. And Ariel does that research for us.
Yeah,
he
right.
tweaks this every year. Ariel Cohen tweaks it every year of what percentage of weight is he going to give to the Bat X, to Steamer. And it's based on how they performed in each category, at each position, each different thing, to come up with that composite of all the projection systems that he incorporates. It doesn't come out until later than the others because he needs everyone else's projections first so he can do it, but it's worth the wait. I love Ariel's ATC projections as well.
Yeah, and he changes which projection systems he uses. It not only just changes the weights, but he'll take one out and put a new one in if his research basically dictates it. So yeah, like the fact that it can be relied on to be unreliable in a way, because you don't know the recipe from season to season. You just have to trust that Ariel's a genius and really smart person, and he knows what he's doing there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the one thing that I went on Fangraphs. I started looking at Steamer over the weekend. I looked at that, and then I saw this week Baseball Prospectus came out with their PECOTA stuff for individual players. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, we have certain people that do good at rankings, okay, and they give out their numbers and stuff like that. And I start looking at different things and how can I incorporate that? Because even when I listen to all the people that I listen to on podcasts, the ADP is going to change dramatically in the next 60 days.
Crazy. Yep. Absolutely.
I mean, and this is where you guys were talking about drafting early, where you may have some chances of getting some value to the good and maybe to the bad. It just depends. Pitching injuries during spring training, those types of things. People that move up a spot. Hey, listen, right now we don't even know where Josh Hader's going to go. He's a top 50 player in most drafts. If he goes to a team that really has a great starting staff and he's going to get more opportunities, he's a lockdown closer. Set it and forget it. But we don't even know what team he's going to be on. Is it the Cubs? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, these early drafts, as you just alluded to, there's so many bad things that can happen to the top half of your draft that I don't necessarily know that it outweighs the rewards you can get in the bottom half of the draft that you're talking about. Like, you can get some guys really late that can shoot up your value rankings due to a signing, due to a trade. I mean, we're not going to talk about them, but like Craig Kimbrell and Yennier Cano basically flipped in their ADP after Kimbrell signed in Baltimore. But then on the other end, you have Max Scherzer, who's still being drafted in the top half of your draft. You know, you lost them for at least the first half of the year. You know, on very extreme, and maybe in early drafts, you know, might have seen some Brandon Woodruff signings at the very, you know, those first couple drafts before it was announced that, you know, he'd be out for the entire year. So things happen, not even just spring training, and those injuries, they seemingly happen to the guys that you're picking in the first like 10 rounds. And then that makes that pick even feel even worse than the possibility of signing a closer in the bottom, you know, 10 rounds of your draft, bottom 5 rounds of your draft, who finds their way into a valuable position. Like if you took a risk on Matsui signing somewhere like San Diego, where he, you know, very well could end up being the closer and being very valuable in the 50th round or the 40th round of a draft and hold. Sure, that feels really good. But is that better? Is that worth more than losing like maybe your SP1 or SP2 in the first like 10 rounds of your draft? I'm not sure.
Do you guys have a set pattern in the first 5 rounds where you like to say to yourself, hook or by crook, in the first 5 rounds, I got to walk away with this?
No,
Absolutely
I mean,
not.
I think I will say that the only thing that comes close for me is in a 12-teamer. If I don't walk away with the starting pitcher in the first 5 rounds, I'm perfectly fine. And if I do end up with that means somebody that I thought should have won in the first 2 rounds dropped to the 5th round. But yeah, no, you know, yeah. Go ahead, Kevin. I mean, you're going to say the same thing. I think
absolutely not. The one thing I was listening to yesterday's Wins Above Fantasy with oh goodness,
Van and Steve.
Yep. Steve. How could I draw a blank on Steve? Goodness. Yeah, Van and Steve, and they echoed what Nick Pollock has said for years, right? You have to have a plan for second base. I think this year that is the case more than it has been in recent years, and that's due to the shift restrictions. Like 2 years ago, I remember looking at like 60 players drafted in the top 300 had second base eligibility. That's no longer the case. And now there's a big cliff at second base. I think you really want to have a plan. Doesn't mean you have to take one in the first 5 rounds, but know what you're going to do if you don't. That is one thing. And one thing I'd like to add back to the projections. I named all of the free projections available on Fangraphs. I'm also a big fan of Todd Zola's Masters Ball projections as well. I'd like to throw that out there.
Yeah, can we remember that? Yeah, I think a lot of like the masses like to rely on those projections on Fangraphs because they're included on the player pages, right? On Zips, on Steamer, depth charts, they're all there. ATC ends up being on there as well. The bat ends up being on there. But yeah, there are other options out there. You talked about Bakota, Adam, and obviously Masters Ball's projections as well. The PLV projections that you talked about being part of the PL Pro package that you get with Pitcher List. So there are a ton of options out there. It's just a matter of knowing the ones you feel the most comfortable with, the ones that you have a little bit of history with, and the ones that provide you transparency. I think that's key to like going with a projection system that you really feel comfortable with. Is what kind of transparency are they bringing? They don't need to give you, you know, everything that they put into it, but you have to be able to trust that what they're putting in is actually making a difference. So like, you know, the Kevin talked about the Bat X puts in StatCast data. You know that because the player pages at Pitcher List are also powered by StatCast now, that we have that data going into that projection system as well. And then obviously we talked about ATC, not knowing for sure, but also kind of knowing what he's putting into it and tweaking it every year and knowing that process. And Ariel goes on podcasts throughout the course of the offseason, kind of talking about him as his projection system's about to come out. So you can really hear a lot of like what goes into that right out of the horse's mouth with him as well.
You know, it's funny you mentioned, Adam, we talked about Todd Zola before we got on.
Yes, we did.
On the podcast. And Todd was just a guest on the Pull Hitter podcast with Rob DiPietro. So I was listening as I was walking the other night, and Todd made a great point because he was talking about, Rob asked him, how did he come up with his projections, or how does he use projections when he looks at other people? And he said almost exactly what you said, Adam. He said, if I know what goes into that particular person's projections, or how I explain how I do my projections, that's when I put weight in it, or when I value what that person's talking. If they're not going to tell me how those numbers are actually, how the food is made,
then they're just numbers.
They're just numbers, and it is. So that's why I respect Todd, because he tells you exactly, this is what I did. I enjoy hearing people when they tell me not only how they come up with things, but when you hear from Todd and how many hours he puts into this, there's a certain level of respect that you have to give somebody and say, listen, this guy's grinding it for the betterment of us, so we can make the right decisions. I could print out the ESPN rankings in 5 seconds, but it doesn't go by,
I wouldn't do that.
I know, but I don't go by, you know what I'm saying? And that's part of the enjoyment of playing fantasy baseball, and that's how I enjoy it. And that's how I would tell somebody else.
Yeah. Sorry, ESPN. There's podcasts dedicated to those rankings when they come out, and they're not usually positive ones. Kevin, what's up?
Yeah. Just one thing. I know everybody's budget is different. Sometimes spending a few bucks on something means that's one less league you can play in. But if you have the ability, the advantage of some of these projection systems and sites that cost a few bucks, PL Pro, right? Or Masters Ball or FTN, all amazing. If you don't have that information, that's information some of your competitors have that you don't, right? Even if you're not putting a huge amount of stock in it when you're making your decisions, it does let you know what some of your competitors are doing, because they will follow those sites religiously.
Yep.
Got to know your league. Got to know the room. All right, guys. This was amazing. We do have to talk about some actual players and some trends that we saw in these last two drafts. We're going to talk about some guys, some major differences in draft spots for a few players throughout the course of the draft. And we're going to do that after this third break. All right, we're back. We are going to play a new game that I named specifically for the season. Guys, we're going to play a game I'm calling Gift or Coal. And how it's going to work is I put together a list of players that were all drafted at some point in the last 12-team listener leagues that we just completed. They were drafted at least one time within the first 20 rounds of the draft. So we're looking at the first 2/3 of the draft in a 30-round draft in a 12-teamer. And they had the largest gap between picks between either the November draft and the December draft or vice versa. So what I want from you guys as we go through these kind of like position by position or groupings by position, if I want to know from you if you think either one of these two picks was a gift, as in they went way later than you would expect, and the team that finally pulled the trigger on them is probably getting a gift in added value based on where they got them, or if the earlier pick you think is going to end up being coal, aka somebody got greedy, they picked them a little bit too earlier than they should have been, and they're not going to return the value. Now, a player could be coal on one side and the gift on the other. they could just be a gift on one side and nothing on the other, or what have you. I'll leave it up to you guys to make the decision on some of these. But that's it. And then we're going to go, and then I got a list at the very end of guys that went past round 20, and just want to see if you guys, that's where you're going to see a lot of fluctuation in general with a ton of players. So I don't want to go player by player with that one. But if there's anybody out there that, gun to your head, you're going to have to draft, which one are you going to feel more comfortable with picking at the early end or the late end? So let's go around the diamond in here. We had a couple of catchers that stood out. All of them went much earlier in the November draft than they did in the December draft. Keibert Ruiz, Tyler Stevenson, and Danny Jansen all went within the first 20 rounds in November, with Keibert Ruiz going in the 14th round at pick 164 on the very earliest end, Jansen at 231 overall. In December, however, they all dropped at least 4, if not 8 rounds in their drafts. So Ruiz went from 164 in November to 212. Stevenson went from 220 to 264. And Jansen went from 231 to 329, a 98 pick swing there. Kevin, overall, is this a trend that you're expecting to see out of catchers in general as people start realizing, hey, the catcher position maybe is a little deeper than we expected it to be? Or do you think this has more to do with these particular players?
I don't think it has to do with particular players. I do think it has a little bit to do with people realizing the catching position's a little deeper than we've been used to the past few seasons. But I think in general, I don't think this is necessarily a trend at all between November to December. This is just different drafts, right? Catcher is one of the positions that you react to as you're drafting. And so the fact that the catchers started going later in the December draft than they did in the November draft, yes, once again, it could have to do with people realizing it's a little deeper than it has been in recent years. But at the same time, it could just as easily be, when did the catchers start getting picked in this draft? Even much earlier. Where were Adley Rutschman and Will Smith and Salvador Perez? And, when were those guys being drafted? And it just affects the whole thing. So I wouldn't look at this as much of a trend, at least to this extent of what we saw, the difference between November and December. It does have a little bit to do with, but I think coming in, most drafters thought that it's the catching position's deeper for 2024 than it has been in the past. In spite of losing, 2 of the top picks from last year due to position eligibility in MJ Melendez and Dalton Varsho, there were so many catchers late in the season available, and people are probably like, hey, Luis Campusano was great for my team last year. Why am I taking these guys earlier? Mm-hmm. So there's something to do with that. But in general, I think this one can still vary draft to draft, and it may not be as much of a trend as it does appear to be.
Adam, you're in both of these drafts. Do you see any of these picks being, as the name of the game is, a gift to any of these teams?
I'm looking at the stats now, and I'm actually surprised at how he finished up. Tyler Stevenson was coming off shoulder surgery going into last year, and I thought it kind of zapped his power. But when I'm looking over here and see how he ended up last year, the power ended up being okay. So if he can bounce back in that ballpark, I think he provides pretty good value at either the 19th round or the 22nd round. I don't see much of a difference. He's the guy that I think could give you some really significant value where he was drafted based on how he performed 2 years ago and the ballpark he plays in.
Yeah, I like that. Full disclosure, the Keibert Ruiz pick in the 18th round in the December draft, that was me. And I wasn't chomping at the bit for him. But as Kevin, as you talked about, like this definitely seemed like a draft where the catchers were just kind of falling. And it was just like, you're playing chicken with everybody else. You're like, all right, well, who's going to finally, and then they all kind of went, in a little bit of a grouping. I wouldn't say I got stuck with Ruiz. I'm happy to have him as somebody who is basically playing every day for the Nationals and kind of coming into his own in that situation. I wouldn't necessarily reach for him though, even in a draft where the catchers are going early. I wouldn't necessarily be reaching for him all the way up in the 14th round. Four rounds earlier than that, where I've got my eye on different things at this point. So I do think that regardless of trends, there are some overall stats you're expecting out of positions that you're going to need to be adjusting for if that trend does change into the draft that you're in at this position. So something to keep an eye on there. Let's head to the infielders, and I'm going to knock one of these off the list right away and just kind of put this out there. Jackson Holliday, he had one of the biggest swings going the 15th round in the November draft and going as high as the 8th round in our December draft. And Kevin, you weren't there. This was definitely an admitted fault of my own, as my queue was set, but it was a mess, and it was absolutely a mess. And I did time out in the 8th round. I got so many messages on the back end. I got text messages, I got emails, I got Discord messages saying, hey, this day got away from me and I did not clean up my queue. So I got Jackson Holliday in the 8th round. So we're not even going to talk about that one. I'm holding myself accountable. I'm putting myself out there on air and letting everybody know that's what happened there. Otherwise, though, I have 3 more guys here in the infield. Nathaniel Lowe, he went much earlier in the November draft. He started to drop, at least in compared to these 2 drafts. Went to the 15th round in November, 19th round in December. Adam, I'm going to start with him specifically. Do you see either one of these as gift or cool?
You're talking about Jackson Holliday and that?
No, I'm skipping Jackson Holliday. We're not talking about him anymore.
Okay. The guy in that group that I want is Nolan Gorman.
So the other 2, I'll jump ahead. We got Nolan Gorman and Edouard Julien, who both went earlier in December than they did in November. So their stock is rising up. So talk to me about Nolan Gorman.
I think Nolan Gorman has a lot of upside. I think before we get to spring training, St. Louis will make a few more deals. Okay, they have an overabundance of outfielders. We know that. They just got done trading Tyler O'Neill to the Red Sox. I know that doesn't affect the infield, but it does potentially open up a spot. Nolan Arenado's ending. He. When I look at Nolan Arenado and I'm trying to see the linkage between him and Nolan Gorman, I don't know what the long-term future is for Arenado in St. Louis, but with Gorman, the only negative that I have with him is really 2. If he can just lessen the amount of his strikeouts and he can go into an extended slump, those are the types of things that just frustrate you as a fantasy owner. But he has power that you just can't teach, and he has a swing that is just phenomenal. And he plays second base, it's very hard to find that type of power. One of these years, he's going to hit 40 home runs. Maybe it's this year, maybe it's next, but he has that type of ability. Yeah,
you hope to get that the year that you draft him in, a bunch of places, of course. Yeah. Especially at the second base hole. Kevin, we'll just group these guys together again. Nathaniel Lowe, the one guy who went earlier in November than he went in December. The other 2 guys, Nolan Gorman and Edouard Julien, going a little bit earlier in December. Stock rising just a little bit at the second base position. Of course, those 2 guys who went earlier at second base, are you putting any stock into the fact that, like you said, you have to have a plan for second base, or again, it's just a little bit of less of a trend because it is only just 2 drafts?
No, I think that is part of it. Or a lot of it. I think second base is going to be an issue in 2024, and the way Nick likes to phrase it, you have to have a plan. And I think that plan for many people after seeing what was going on in November was, okay, if I don't grab one of the top four, and the top four being Betts, Albies, Simeon, Altuve, that there's a big cliff after that. I mean, there's a big drop already at the position. Was okay, so I'm going to wait. I get a Nolan Gorman. I get a Edouard Julien. And so they're coming up a little bit. I think the gift here is the December draft pick for Nathaniel Lowe. Lowe, one of these players that, you know, had a great 2022, even chipped in some stolen bases. We didn't see stolen bases from him in 2023 in spite of the rules changes, but that's not his game. I think the power can be there. We're not looking at 30, 35 home runs. We're looking at 25 home runs is probably what I would expect from him. And in DC's since mid-November, his ADP is between his min is 179, max 221. So this pick was close to his max in December. And I like that a lot here. Like I said, I have realized after the drafts I've done that I've drafted Freddie Freeman. I have drafted Bryce Harper. I've drafted Matt Olson. I've drafted Pete Alonso. I've drafted Vlad Guerrero. In some leagues, I've drafted more than one of those guys. And then I get to this range in the draft: Vinny Pasquantino, Nathaniel Lowe, Rhys Hoskins, Brandon Drury, and players I like that are at good value at this point in the draft, and I don't have a spot for them. Right. And that is an adjustment I'm making going forward. I have realized I'm drafting too many first basemen too early in the drafts I've done so far.
Yeah, I've definitely been guilty of that as well in at least one draft that I've done. We talked about it at the top of the show about, Adam, we talked about the outfield not being, as deep as you'd like it to be. Kevin, we're talking a lot about second base not being very deep. Push comes to shove, which one are you prioritizing? And I'm going to use my specific example of NFBC 50 that I just finished up. I thought the same thing as far as second base in that draft. I picked Betts 2 overall with the expectation that he's my starting second baseman, right? As the draft went on and on, I realized, all right, first of all, I only picked one outfielder at that time. And then all of a sudden, it just seems as though these second basemen were just falling. So I'm like, all right, well, I could either pick a couple second basemen and then move Betts into my outfield, or I can go after the outfielders that are available at this time. The value was with the second baseman. So I ended up with Gleyber Torres. I ended up with Zach Geloff, who I'll be targeting late as well, while he still stays late. I think if Casey Bubba has anything to say about it, he's going to start jumping off draft boards as well. But I almost felt like, maybe I wouldn't have picked Betts 2 overall if I knew he was going to be in my outfield. Anyway, I'm not unhappy about it. I'm perfectly happy to have him there. But maybe I would have, gone towards somebody where I feel a little bit more comfortable with the 50 stolen bases out of Corbin Carroll, or even Julio Rodriguez, who's going to get the 30 plus. And so, yeah, I mean, which one do you think on a more regular basis is going to be something that you need to focus on? You need 5 outfielders. You only need 1 second baseman.
Right. Just earlier today, I was thinking of this, that a couple of the drafts I've done, I wished I had drafted Mookie Betts. And it's the advantage, not only that he's a great player and he's going to perform as a first round draft pick, but it gives you that flexibility that you just talked about. When I draft Mookie Betts as a top 5 pick or top 8 pick, wherever he's going right now, I'm penciling him in at second base. But as the draft goes on, if there's a better second baseman available than there is an outfielder available, that's an easy switch to make. So that's the advantage of getting a guy like Betts in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, this is what was true with like Trey Turner when he had dual eligibility at the top of the draft. You could just choose which middle infield spot you were gonna go with, or outfield spot when he had it. And so it's the same idea.
Position eligibility can be as much or even more advantageous during the draft as it can be in season, because you have that flexibility to move guys around.
Yeah, I mean, that's true for gladiators, especially early in the draft. They're stuck in the position
Ohtani,
throughout the season.
If you have to, you can move him to pitcher, right?
Yeah.
Not this year.
Not this year. No. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move to the last bit of hitting grouping here. We got in the outfield, outfielders who went at least one time in the 20th round or earlier. Let's group these two early guys together first. Adam, we'll start with you. Cedric Mullins and Esteury Ruiz, they both dropped. And as I talked about earlier, Ruiz dropped quite a bit. He went 74 picks lower in December than he did in November, dropping from the 11th round to the 17th round. Cedric Mullins went 9th round in November, dropped 4 rounds to the 13th in December. Do you attribute anything in particular to either one of these drops? As I kind of alluded to with Ruiz, obviously, my thoughts on that, but were you kind of surprised by either one of these drops, and or do you see a value in where they were picked?
The thing with Ruiz is I had him on a number of teams last year. He went late in the summer, had an injury, and when he came back, he didn't get consistent playing time. So that's the one area I'm concerned. How are the A's going to use him? Obviously, there's not a lot of talent in that outfield. You have Seth Brown. I mean, he should be able to get consistent playing time. Cedric Mullins, on the other hand, last year, he had a really, really down year. A lot of strikeouts. He was injured.
Not playing every day.
I mean, that Orioles team scares me from a standpoint. You have a lot of young kids. You don't know how, you have them down here a little bit later in the next grouping, like Austin Hayes. And I feel like they're in the same thing, except Cedric Mullins has a lot of speed. If I can get Ruiz in the 17th round or the 16th round based on steals, that's a gift, especially with, obviously our feelings about steals. The rest of the guys that are in that grouping, Ruiz would be the guy that he does something so superior that it just draws you to him.
Yeah, the Ruiz thing is interesting to me only because, like I talked about, he's so one-dimensional, really, especially on the A's. He doesn't have to play every day to steal 50, 60 bases. He doesn't have to be. But that's all you're really banking on are those stolen bases. So if you built your roster with that deficiency by the time Ruiz comes, it comes time to draft Ruiz, whether it's the 11th round or the 17th round, that's a gift regardless, just based on the fact that that's how you ended up drafting your team. But if you prioritize that category in the first 5 rounds, and there are plenty of players to do that with, especially at the top half of the first round of the draft, pretty much if you got a 1 through 6 pick, you're going to get somebody, unless you go pitcher, that's going to steal you, 20 to 40 bases on average. So at least you have that base to work off of. But if you weren't able to do that and you went Freddie Freeman or you went Matt Olson, you went that first base route, you went that power heavy route, then Ruiz is a good compliment regardless of where he gets drafted. He just has to fit what you've been doing. Mullins is a little bit more well-rounded as long as he gets the playing time. So I think that it's just as the season goes on, I'm expecting somebody like Mullins to drop a little bit more as they start doing a little bit more deep dive. The name recognition wears off from what we saw him do in his 30-30 season, et cetera, et cetera. So a couple other outfielders in here, Kevin, they all brought their stock up, I guess, in our December draft, as they all went close to 3 or 4 rounds earlier than we saw them go in November. All pretty much going around, similar relatively similar spots. We got Kerry Carpenter. He went in the 19th round in November, up as high as the 16th round in December. Taylor Ward went from the 20th round to the 16th round. And then MJ Melendez, he went as low as the 24th round in November, but jumped up to the 20th round. Of course, I want to know how you feel about MJ Melendez and how much playing time he's actually going to get in Kansas City. As you mentioned earlier, they still have too many outfielders. But what's your are any of these guys in this little threesome a gift, or are they coal on either end of this?
I think all three of them were a gift in November, and that's what we saw with them getting drafted right around 3 rounds earlier, exactly 3 rounds for Ward and Melendez, and just a handful of picks less than 3 rounds earlier for Kerry Carpenter. And I think it goes to that 5 outfield leagues. Outfield dries up pretty quick. People realize that. And with Melendez, I think the initial thought, and mine as well, even as a Royals fan, is, oh, no catcher eligibility. I'm not even paying attention to MJ Melendez. Well, then you look at his second half numbers and how he improved throughout the year, started showing what he had done in his rookie season and in the minors. And now Melendez, even at pick 240, I think seems like a nice spot to me. I think in general, it's people are realizing outfield isn't so deep in 5 outfielder leagues, is why we saw this increase on all 3 of them. So definitely a gift for all of them in November. I think I still like all of them where they're going in December. I've always been a fan of Kerry Carpenter. I'd be the most concerned about Taylor Ward in this spot. We've just seen him so volatile, and injuries have had a lot to do with that. The team context is not great, to say the least. So yeah, I'm happy with all of them in December. The only one I wouldn't have taken in their spot in November is probably Taylor Ward.
To be fair, I mean, I think I'm pretty sure the Taylor Ward was my pick in December. Let's just keep in mind his injury that kept him off the field for the second half of the season was a fluke. He got hit in the face and had facial surgery that kept him out the rest of the year. So, I mean, yeah, he's, like many players, he's had other injuries, but at least the most recent one, not his fault, per se, or at least not his body's fault. All right. We got a bunch of pitchers here on the list.
Let me back up real quick, Adam, before we go to pitchers. Esteury Ruiz is fascinating to me, and I think those that drafted Esteury Ruiz for 2023 were more than ecstatic of what they got from him, especially that 254 batting average. I don't think we were expecting that. I have heard, I think it was Ryan Bloomfield on Bubba and the Bloom saying that he had Ruiz on the same team that he had Ronald Acuna, and for the last third of the season, he didn't play Ruiz. And I think, great, right? And I wouldn't drop him either in that scenario, unless you take a really deep dive on that stolen base category in a roto league.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that with saves.
Right. You hold on to him even if you're not starting him. But for teams that didn't have Ronald Acuna's 70 steals, that did have Esteury Ruiz, he helped them win the league or cash in that league. And just like you said, just like Adam saying, I mean, there is a spot for him on rosters. And I'm not going to pencil him in for a 254 batting average, but if I'm getting into the double-digit rounds and I'm short on stolen bases, in my opinion, I'm absolutely grabbing Esteury Ruiz.
Yeah, I'm hoping he he gets back to an everyday playing time, as Adam talked about earlier. It was worrisome that, they kind of babied him a little bit as he came back from that injury, but Steamers got him for a 249. So they're not dropping him a whole bunch that batting average category. So, 49 stolen bases instead of 67. I think that's probably on the low end based
and that's
on
a projection, right? A projection, and they're conservative.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Especially on the hitter side. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So like I said, we got a bunch of pitchers to talk about at different levels here, and we are going to get to all of them after this break. All right, let's get right into the pitchers, guys. Let's bunch these two together. Adam, we'll start here off with you with the high-end pitchers, literally going back-to-back in both drafts. Justin Verlander and Dylan Cease both went in the 7th round, went 3 picks apart from each other in November. Both dropped down to the 11th round in December, going 2 picks apart from each other, 127, 129 respectively overall. Yeah, are these guys that are just have a little bit too much question? I mean, they come from very different areas. As far as team concepts go, as age goes, there's not much really linking these two guys besides where they're going in drafts. Are you happy to pick them up as late as the 11th round, or are you reaching for either one of them in the 7th?
The 7th round is too sweet. That's really too soon to pick up either one. I'm a fan of Dylan,
especially in a 12-teamer.
Yeah, Cease I'm a big fan of. I just think he had one of those years. Verlander, I think he's teetering on one of those things where he's going to miss a few starts, but you could say that about any pitcher and stuff like that. 7th round is way too juicy. The 11th round on Cease is somebody you have to strongly consider. You know what? I'm being a little bit too harsh. If I could get Verlander in the 11th round and I can be assured, he's taking the ball, he wants to win games, I'm good with either pitcher in the 11th round.
So, all right, either one, sure. But, all right, they're going back to back. You're up. They're both on the board.
And I would prefer to have Cease.
Okay. All right. Are you saying that because you just like Cease better as a pitcher? Because being with the White Sox isn't doing him any favors. We know that.
I don't think he's going to be with the White Sox.
There it is. And that was my question.
I don't think he's going to be with the White Sox. I think they're going to wait this out to see what other starting pitchers sign as free agents. The team that is on the outside looking in for one of these big free agents, they're going to be on the phone with the White Sox with prospects. Let's talk about Cease. I just think he'll be in a different environment. I think that White Sox environment last year is like almost toxic.
Oh my God!
And I just, I just don't think that was the right environment for him. He had too good of a year the previous year I just thought last year was an outlier.
Yeah, runner up for the AL Cy Young, if I remember correctly, that season. So
and people forget that quickly.
Yeah. All right, we got. Kevin, we'll lump these. We can lump all 3 of these guys together, I think. Especially, I want to get Lugo in on your takes here. Of course, all right, Seth Lugo, that is. 23rd round in November. He's the only one that went a little bit earlier. I think there's probably an obvious reason here, but I'll let you make assumptions for me. Went to the 19th round in December. Of course, after the news broke that he actually signed a deal with a team that was going to put him in the rotation, or keep him in the rotation, that is. On top of that, guys going a little bit earlier than him, at least in November, were Nick Lodolo and Shane Bieber going in the 17th and 13th round, respectively. They both dropped, with Nick Lodolo dropping below Seth Lugo, going in the 22nd round in December. Shane Bieber still above Lugo, but a much, much closer in the 18th round, going just 8 picks before Lugo, dropping 55 picks himself, though. So between Shane Bieber and Nick Lodolo dropping quite a bit, and then Seth Lugo jumping up equal amounts, which one has your eye? Which one do you have your eye on here?
I think in the December drafts at pick 254, Nick Lodolo is a gift. He is amazing. The only negative, that means it's not the only negative, so I need to reword this. Couple of negatives: the ballpark and the injury history, right? But his stuff is phenomenal. If we can get a healthy Nick Lodolo, and he gives us 130 innings, he is going to well outperform this draft price, in my opinion. Seth Lugo, Yes, the jump 50 spots in ADP, he signed, and he went to a good pitcher's ballpark. I'm fine with it. I'm probably looking for guys like Nick Lodolo with more upside at this point, but Seth Lugo, steady, great ballpark, and I think he's fine there. Shane Bieber is someone that the 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 decrease in velocity over the past couple of seasons, and I am shocked that he was drafted in the 13th round in our first 12-team league. 12-team listener league, and the drop to 18th round, probably not enough for me. He's someone I don't have much interest in where he has been being drafted. I love Nick Lodolo, especially at the later spot, and Seth Lugo I'm fine with.
Yeah, so doesn't sound like necessarily we got a lot of takes from you guys as far as guys that you prefer them at their later spots, but not so much. Is there anybody that we've talked about so far from this group that you feel on their early end was a little bit of a stretch? Team got greedy. You'd call it specifically Cole. So we're talking all the way back up to the catcher position down to the starter pitchers that we talked about. We'll get to the post round 20 guys in just a bit, but from this first group, Adam, start with you. Is there anybody here that you felt like whoever picked them the earliest probably stretched a little bit? Jackson Holiday, put that one to the side.
Honestly, at the 7th round, I think the Verlander and Cease picks are. I think that's when you're really, rushing to get things. It's funny. I'm sitting here looking at Steamer's projections, and because I wanted to see, okay, what are we talking about? Shane Bieber rates is 26, Cease is 34, Verlander's 42. So, I mean, the thing I agree with what Kevin's saying about Shane Bieber, his velocity. See, that's the one thing with all the fan graphs and all the StatCast data where you can't hide when you have velocity decreases. That makes people from franchises get nervous. Like, what's going on? Is he going to be honest? Does he have an arm problem? What's it? Do I have to rush him in for an MRI? I don't know. But the one thing about Shane Bieber above all these guys, he knows how to pitch. He's not just a thrower. He can pitch. And he's another guy that I think in spring training, if he pitches well, probably going to be dealt because of how much money he makes, but at 8, first off, we're in the 18th round. If you get him in a 25, if you have a 25 or 30, whatever league that you're playing in, that's pretty juicy getting a nice pitcher like that with good upside. And what's the worst thing that can happen? You cut him at the 18th round. That's not a spot you worry too much about. Too much upside in 18th round.
Yeah, especially in a 12-teamer where the replacement value, even at starting pitcher, can be something that you can feel comfortable taking a chance on in rotating through. Kevin, same question. Anybody on here besides the guys that Adam touched on, you see as more of a Cole pick where they reached a little bit too early?
I think even at the later pick in December, Dylan Cease, it's all about that name, and I'm not going there, right? Many people, including Nick Pollock, including many other people at Pitcher List and other podcasts and other content providers, so many of us had concerns about Dylan Cease going into 2023, and it came to fruition. A 4.58 ERA, 7 wins. Yes, over 200 strikeouts. And everybody that talked negatively about Dylan Cease going into 2023 acknowledged you'll get the strikeouts, but that's all you're getting. What he gave us is what we were expecting. So that's what I'm expecting going forward. And it's not worth an 11th round draft pick.
Fair enough. All right, guys, let's end on this late round swings. Got a list in front. I'll list all the guys off to give you guys a chance to think it over. But these are all guys we expect there to be swings in the bottom third of your draft, right? You're going to have guys. This is the time where you're like, your entire queue is just full of guys you just want to grab. right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't necessarily matter if you get him in the 30th round or you get him in the 25th round or you get him, 22nd round. But these guys all had the biggest swings of this group, some earlier, some later. I did leave off the guys that weren't drafted at all in one draft or the other. These are guys that are drafted in both drafts. And we're going to go down the list, and I want again, they might not be on your queue, and you can say that if you want, but you still got to pick, hey, I have to draft this guy. Fine. I like him enough where I'm going to reach for him at these early of the 2 picks, or no, I'm just going to wait. I'll get him at the very end, and then I'll deal with the consequences after the fact because I don't really like him. So Ceddanne Rafaela of the Boston Red Sox in November, so of all these guys, he had the biggest swing. He went in the 22nd round in November. Fairly confident that one was me. But in December, dropped all the way down to the 30th round. He was one team's final pick at pick overall 350. Kevin, first one's for you. You've got to draft Ceddanne. Where are you reaching for him at 22, or you're just going to be stuck with him at 30?
I'll just be stuck with him at 30. I think Duran is the center fielder. Tyler O'Neill, as long as he stays healthy, is the left fielder. I think they're gonna give Abreu the first shot ahead of Rafaela. So yeah, I have to take the later one here. I think he's got potential, but unfortunately, as of right now, I don't think he has the plate appearances.
Yeah, I agree. Especially, I think I already quoted it, but you go back to an October edition of Zimmerman's Mining the News. It's already mentioned that there's a strong possibility he starts in AAA to work not on his defense, but on his offense. His defense is elite. And so to have to say that he's got to work on his offense in the minor leagues is both saying that there's not going to be everyday playing time for him in Boston to start, and maybe there will be in Worcester. The next one on the list with a decently sized jump in the outfield still, Brian De La Cruz. Adam, we got him going in the 24th round in November, 29th round in December. You've got to draft De La Cruz. You waiting until the 29th to pull the trigger, or are you shooting him up the board at 24?
I just took him in one of our leagues. And, since I seen him play a lot with the Marlins, he went through a stretch last year that I picked him up and I was really happy that I did. It was right around the same time that Jazz Chisholm had an injury. I like him. And the Marlins have not really added much to the outfield, so I think he's going to get playing time. And I think there's some more there. Not at the 24th round, but anywhere from 26 to 29, I think he has some value. I think he has some value, especially in a 5 outfielder league.
Yeah, I think with him, it's all going to be about playing time. And like you said, I mean, they're not bringing back Soler. Granted, he's not clogging up the DH spot, which, in theory, gives a lot of opportunity to a lot of players. Probably more so Josh Bell, but at the same time, the outfield can switch around as well. De
La Cruz's playing time probably got safer. Mm-hmm. And he had 626 plate appearances in 153 games last season. 19 home runs, just a handful of stolen bases, but close to 80 RBI, 60 runs scored. At this spot, even at his early draft spot, in my mind, that's a gift.
All right, Willie Castro, next on the list, one of the few guys on here that does still have a position flexibility with third base and outfield eligibility in NFBC. Kevin, he went 26th round in November. He was my final pick in the 30th round in December, overall 356 pick. Willie Castro, obviously not guaranteed playing time per se with the Twins, but with everything that has to do with the Twins, injuries do usually provide other players with added opportunity, between Alex Kirilloff, Royce Lewis, Brian Bruxton, all being pretty prone to that, unfortunately. Willie Castro with that eligibility and the stolen bases that late in the draft. Is this somebody that you would target in the early part of the bottom third, or you're fine, I'll be stuck with them in the 30th?
The easy answer is always going to be, I'd rather be stuck with him in the 30th. But this is one of the players that depends on how you have drafted up to this point. It's really hard to ignore 33 stolen bases in 409 plate appearances. And so if you are light on speed, then I can absolutely see justifying the earlier draft spot, especially he's not a zero in power. He's not great, but 9 home runs and 409 plate appearances, leading to projections, at least what we have so far, Steamer, giving him double-digit home runs and just a few more plate appearances. So it's not just the so-called burner or rabbit. He is contributing in other spots, and a batting average that doesn't hurt you either. The more I think about it, even at the earlier draft spot, he's going to get this playing time, I think, with Minnesota, maybe even more than he's being projected for. I understand big platoon guy. I understand he's had issues in the past, but he might get into more than 107 games and being projected for double-digit home runs and 20-plus stolen bases in just 107 games. I could probably go the earlier spot here even.
All right, I'm going to lump these last because they're all outfielders with, Mitt Werefield be having some flexibility possibly going into 2024. But we got, Adam, we'll lump these together, and Kevin, I'll get your take on all 4 of them as well. But Brent Rooker, Austin Hayes, Alec Thomas, and Whit Merrifield all went a little bit later in the late part of the December draft than they did in November, ranging from Brent Rooker in the 22nd round, Alec Thomas being someone's final pick in the 30th round at pick 360 overall. They all pretty much had the same swing, right around 44 to 49 pick swings. So they're all dropping in unison together. Were all 4 of these guys, are you looking at any of them at these early picks, or are you happy being stuck with them at the end?
I've always been a fan of Austin Hayes, so it's kind of like teases me a little bit. Somewhere in that 24 to 28, again, playing time, but he's the kind of guy that he could have a breakout, especially if we end up overrating some of these Orioles prospects that have come up and really haven't performed yet. If they don't perform in it, we can get Austin Hayes to 500 at-bats, and he can get very lucky and have an injury-free year. He's going to put up some monster numbers. I mean, really good numbers.
Yeah. I mean, these are, let's keep in mind, all these picks are all bench picks. And right now, so far, all these guys are bench bats. We'll get to a couple pitchers in a second. But these are all guys that are going to be sitting on your bench. And when you're in my mind, I had this question come up in a conversation earlier in the week. When you're drafting these fab leagues, these 30-round fab leagues where you have your 7 bench spots in the NFBC, almost all of these final 7 picks are all upside picks in my mind. I could take a lot more risk with these picks in these early fab leagues, and guys that either can hit their way into a good situation in spring training. They can sign with a team where they weren't on before with a different opportunity. They can be a prospect who wins a job out of spring training, and then all of a sudden, they would have jumped up. Maybe in those late March drafts, you start seeing them jump up to in the top 150 picks instead of being around 300. And so, to me, when I look at these guys personally, it's like, which one of them has the opportunity to show me something more in not only spring training, but maybe in the first 2-3 weeks of April or are they just players? They are who we thought they were. To me, Alec Thomas is the one that stands out the most in that situation. where he just didn't have that kind of playing time that we thought he might have had in Arizona last year. He kind of went back into it toward the end of the season and made a name for himself in the playoffs, at least early on in the playoffs. And he, I think, with a full-time gig in that outfield in Arizona, can get back to that prospect, that high prospect status that we saw him. We followed him through the minors, and he has the most opportunity to kind of jump up early on in the season. Now, as Nick Pollock says with pitchers, you could do the same thing with these hitters that you're picking too, where you're like, okay, you got to make a decision early on in the season. You want to be able to make a decision on these bench bats that you're kind of streaming through, just like you're streaming pitchers in a shallow league. You want to be able to stream your hitters as well until you can kind of find somebody who's working out for you, not only in a short-term period, but also maybe who's showing you something a little bit more of a swing change, somebody who's adapting and adjusting better than the guy maybe that you drafted. And you want to be able to cycle through those in April and May until you can find, the Brent Rookers of the world who go on a tear for a 2-month stretch. And you got to be okay with when you see the adjustment going the other way to kind of drop into the curb and, move on to the next thing. Somebody else.
I think the fact that they didn't re-sign or haven't really re-signed Tommy Pham kind of bodes well to Alek Thomas, that he's going to come and, should have a position. He's the guy on this list also that you close your eyes and he's going to steal 25 bases.
Sure. Especially in Arizona, who obviously they have other talent on there that they're willing to let run around the bases.
So, and he's one of those guys that was a hot prospect that just hasn't made that leap yet. But I still think, because they didn't sign Tommy Pham, that kind of speaks to that they have some confidence in him.
You'll be curious to see where Pham ends up signing as well. He'll be somebody that if he signs in the right spot, obviously his ADP will jump right back up, especially after the season. Most of the season he was able to piece together last year, especially in the second half.
There's one guy on this list, though, that if you look at Steamer, you like jumping up and down, and it's Alejandro Kirk.
Well, let's get right into these guys that these two hitters on the end at the bottom of the list that actually went a little bit earlier in their December drafts compared to the November. One of those, Alejandro Kirk, as you mentioned, 27th round in November, 23rd round in December, and then Alex Verdugo going from the 29th round down, up, depending on how you're looking at it, up to the 25th round in December. Obviously, this came after the news that he was traded to the New York Yankees. That clean-shaven Alex Verdugo, always a weird sight to see that when a player ends up forced to do that. Where do we live? Are we living in a zoo? What's going on here, guys? Let's change that. So, Adam, let's you start that off. Obviously, you have thoughts on Kirk. I'm curious to know in what direction, though.
This is where I use the projections when I look over a catcher, because I'm trying to piece into the fact that you have some phenomenal catchers up top, with Rutschman, who's a top 5 round, catcher. And then you look at some of the other catchers that are there. Steamer has him projected as the 9th best catcher. Where are you going to get that type of value where he's projected at here? Even in the 23rd round, the projection's way better than a 23rd round pick, and he'll be your second catcher.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm curious to know what kind of playing time the Blue Jays are going to give him. He's, slotted in as basically the only catcher on the roster, according to Roster Resource. Obviously, Danny Jansen ended last season with injury. They've got him down. I mean, Steamer's got him down for 403 plate appearances. So they're giving him more than the bulk of time behind the plate. Maybe he doesn't DH the way that many might have thought, but at the same time, if he is able to get that kind of volume, I totally see that.
Yeah, when you take a look at some of the other catchers that are behind him based on their projections, I mean, of course, I'd be jumping up and down with JT Realmuto. It's still at this stage of his game, but the rest of them, I mean, the only question mark you have there is a guy like Yanir Diaz in Houston. Does he jump up this year with regular playing time?
He does. In my opinion. I mean, I'm a big Diaz fan. I felt bad. So in my home dynasty league, I've got too many. I have Adley Rutschman and Salvi Perez, so I'm like, I'm not looking at catcher position. And of course, last year in a single catcher league, by the way. And so I'm not looking at catchers. So I have, people talking to me, and at the end of the year, I have a team that was at the bottom of the standings, and he's like talking about this catcher, that catcher. I'm like, listen, if you want to throw darts at the wall, go pick up Yanni or Diaz and just be happy, thank me later. And he did. And, he went off at the very end of the year. He got, somewhat more playing time. And then, of course, the announcement's already been made that, he's the everyday, he's the starting catcher going into 2024 by Dusty Baker. And Yanni or Diaz believers rejoice. You feel like Dusty Baker's finally making a decision that you agree with. Kevin, you're nodding your head at the earlier stages, so I'm assuming you feel very similarly about Diaz.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a similar situation. Single catcher, home league, 12-team league. I had JT Real Muto, and somehow we have unlimited IL and a fairly big bench. So I had William Contreras as well. Mid-season, I picked up Yanier Diaz.
Just because, yeah.
For nothing. In our off-season, we're just about to open up our off-season trading, but due to keeper prices and everything, I dropped Contreras and Real Muto, and I'm more than happy rolling into the season with Yanier Diaz.
Off your free agent mark. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, Alex Verdugo, the other one on here. Kevin, 25th round a little too early, or 29th round too late?
I'm going to default to the later one here again. I'm not a big Alex Verdugo guy. I know outfield is thin, and by the time that's second to last round of an NFBC 12-team draft, get him in the 29th round. Yeah, that's fine. I'm sure many teams in the league will have a worse fifth outfielder than Alex Verdugo. I'm just not big on him. Of all the guys on this list of the post 20th round, that we've talked about this multiple times already this offseason, I really want to see where Whit Merrifield lands, right? It's a volume play. And even I think a lot of people would be surprised to see that Whit Merrifield had 596 plate appearances in 2023. If he's going to get anywhere close to that, players we were talking about earlier, double-digit home runs, 20-plus stolen bases, 60 to 70 runs and RBI, batting average that not only doesn't hurt you, actually helps a little bit, at least stabilize your batting average, if not bring it up. You're just not finding players like this at this point in a draft. So if he lands somewhere where we're going to see this playing time, close to 600 plate appearances, Whit Merrifield's a gift at either of these positions.
All right.
Can you imagine if the Pirates signed him?
Oh, he would lead off and get 700 plate appearances, and I would jump into, I am not exaggerating, 15th, 16th round. I don't think that's crazy.
To be fair, I think we didn't mention in the news, but I do remember seeing they did bring back Andrew McCutchen. So I'm wondering how much room they would have for somebody else that's just like him to an extent.
It's a perfect sign for them.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we got
I would love that.
two guys on here, both pitchers. We'll lump them together. Kevin, I'm going to start with you here so we can end with Adam. His thoughts. Michael Wacha, of course, we talked about earlier. He signs as well with your Royals. He jumps up from the 25th to the 21st round compared to November, December drafts. And then Jameson Taillon goes from the 28th round in November up to the 25th round. Again, these guys are still being drafted in positions where more than likely they are a bench pitcher, backup pitcher. Maybe Wacha ends up in your top of your rotation and in the 21st round, granted. But at the same time, are either one of these guys? Are you happy with any kind of upside that you might have seen out of Jameson Taillon in the second half of the season? Are you scared away from him, or you're just avoiding him? And then is the move to Kansas City for Wacha worth the jump, 4-round jump?
I love Wacha. When he's sound, I think he's a solid pitcher. Taillon, to me, I think there's reason. I mean, I don't know who in Chicago thought that what they were getting to give him that type of money. I think he's a really, really average pitcher. Taillon is a guy that every 2 weeks he ends up on the waiver wire. You pick him up, you stream him, you pick him up, you stream him, that type of thing. But Wacha, when he's healthy, if you close your eyes, he's going to have between 13 and 16 wins.
Kevin, is he getting between 13 and 16 wins with the Royals next year?
American League Central champion.
So, excuse me, I forgot. Yes, I understand.
They're going to let him pitch.
Well, that's right. For sure. I mean, they're going
to let him go further in game.
I say wherever he was going to go, they were going to let him pitch. Like that's the kind of contract he was going to get. That's the environment in which he was going to, like, somebody wasn't going to pick him. They weren't going to sign him as their number 6. Like he was going to sign with the team like the Royals, who had a number 2, 3, or 4 spot in their rotation that needs to be eaten up.
It's all about health with him. He's in the right ballpark.
Yeah, definitely. Like Kevin, like you said, doesn't hurt with home runs, and so definitely worth the 4-round bump from a 25th round pick puts him on your bench. 21st round pick puts him in your starting lineup in your starting 9 spots. You both agree that that's a warranted pick based on his signing then?
Yep,
I believe so. I mean, there's a lot of relievers starting to go by this point in NFBC ADP. And by that, I mean relievers that are not closers. This is where we see Matt Brash. This is where we see some Griffin Canning, who is back to starting. And I loved Griffin Canning a few years ago. Loved what we saw out of him in 2023. Hopefully he can continue to make his way back and be the guy we thought he could be. We're seeing Hunter Harvey here, may or may not be the closer. Cutter Crawford, you know about all the questions with him, and some upside as well. Being the Boston Red Sox fan, I think in this range of the guys we see going, Michael Wacha is probably the safest now in that ballpark that he's landed in.
You missed my only 100% rostered player in Robert Stevenson. He's going a little bit later than all those guys you listed, but had to throw out the shout out to Robert Stevenson as my only single player in 5 drafts I've completed. The only guy I have on all 5 teams, even my Gladiators. So here's crossing my fingers he ends up being one of those. You got him at
pick 400 in a draft. That's amazing.
I was not upset with that. We'll see. I mean, he's the type of player that, he's the ultimate, like, if he signs in the perfect spot, then, he jumps up into the, at least a second tier of closers. If, you have a little bit more confidence that he actually has a job, just because his peripherals are not hurting. He at least goes up to like where Tanner Scott's going, in my opinion, because he's Tanner Scott, basically, just, depending on what team and what role he ends up having. All right, guys, this was awesome. That's going to wrap it up for episode 143, though. Kevin, I'll let you lead us out here with any additional words of wisdom.
Yeah, we talk about ADP a lot. We've referenced it a lot in this show. We've talked about it tons over the last 3 seasons, Adam. It's a tool. It's not the end all be all. It's for determining what the market is on players. And everybody in this industry makes those same comments. And then you look at a draft and 360 players are drafted in a league, and only 20 to 25 of them aren't ranked by ADP in the top 360. We say we don't follow ADP. We say it's just a tool, and we're kidding ourselves. And I, for one, am trying to do a much better job at this. Tool only. I mean, the fact that you only get 25 out of 360 players that aren't ranked in the top 360 drafted in a 360 player draft is ridiculous in my mind. We are slaves to ADP, and we shouldn't be, no matter how much we talk about it and claim that we're not. We are. And I am trying to make a concerted effort to not be. And this goes out to, we hear in March threw ADP out the window, right? Well, to an extent, yes, but it's typically still that same group of 360 or 450 players, depending on the size of the league. They're just shuffled around a little bit. And it's yes, obviously, even when you consider in your own mind, I can't draft Ronald Acuna Jr. and Julio Rodriguez in the same league. You're using ADP in your head, maybe not looking at it, but you just know it's not possible. Yes, it has its place, but I am of the opinion now. Second round. Already, second round. The available player pool is everybody that's not been picked, not who ADP tells me who has been going in the second round. And it gets more so as the draft goes on. I think ADP, as much as we want to talk about it being a tool and it's not the end all be all, it's not the way we draft.
I'm going to tack on something here just because I found this interesting in the last 2 drafts that I've done. You got to remember that, especially when you're in the draft room, the ADP is a consolidation of every format that platform has concluded. So, of course, we're talking about NFBC because they've already done a ton of drafts. There's best balls. There's draft and holds. There are gladiators that are only 23 rounds. And there's been a lot of them already. Those are impacting ADP more than any other format because you have players that are not being drafted there and their ADP goes way down because of the sample size.
And catchers going up because they have to be drafted
because they have to be drafted
rounds.
Yep. Earlier than you would normally see them being drafted on somebody's bench or in the reserve spots. I'll use 4 out of 5 drafts that I've done. I have a couple of players, one of them being Olivares Martinez, prospect for the Blue Jays, shortstop / third base / second base, depending on where they end up putting him once he gets called up. Obviously did not pick him in my gladiator. I only did one gladiator, but all my other leagues, they're fab leagues. His ADP is like over 600. When you try to search for him, like I scroll down, I can't find him. I have to do the search, and he's all the way down at like 600 plus. I use that to my advantage because I like Olivares Martinez. I'm going to obviously have drafted him in all 4 of my fab leagues, but I don't want to have to draft him where I want to draft him or I'm willing to draft him because I don't have to. Because to your point, ADP is still a thing. It's still a thing that people look at, and they. I know you said second round, but I'm saying at the very least 15th, 20th round. Like if you're still strictly going by ADP, you're gonna miss out. Simple as that.
I love auctions. One of the reasons I love auctions is starting pitching. I can draft 4 or 5 $15 starting pitchers, and I used to say you can't do that in a snake draft. Why not? You absolutely can. You just have to start taking them a little earlier. If those are the players you want. And if they're the players I want, why do I care what ADP says? So if I want to go hitter heavy early and then get those $15 pitchers, it means I have to start drafting guys with an 8th round ADP in the 5th or 6th round, and I'll get them. It's fine. I took 4 hitters in the first 4 rounds, right? Even in a 15-team league. You talked earlier about that's the way you draft 12-team leagues. You can even do it in a 15-team league. You just have to be willing to take the guys as early as it takes, not just to get that guy, but to get the others that you want as well.
Yeah, the next down the line. Sure. All right. Great advice. Great things to live by. I'm going to shout it back over to Adam. Adam, thank you so much. Adam Lazarus, of course, our coach champion.
Thanks a lot for letting me come in these listener leagues. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, well, we got you in 2. We'll see if we get you in any more moving forward. But at the very least, glad to have you in at least 2 out of, question mark. We don't know how many we're going to end up with this year. Hopefully we at least hit the 10 that we had last year we will have 2 overall champions next year since we're doing the 12s and the 15s. They're not linked. So it'd be nice to see how that works out. Adam, do you have anything else? Do you have any plans of doing any other podcast tours or anything like that everybody should be looking for?
This is great. I'm not advertising anything. I'm following you guys, you guys are the guys I listen to try to get more information to educate myself. So,
well, we appreciate that.
I'm glad to do it.
Started the listener leagues. We tried to get 6 listeners and then 6 content creators, including ourselves, in each league. The overall champions for the first 2 seasons have not been content creators.
Yeah. We talked about earlier off air. It's like we had Casey Bubba on as right before the season ended because he had such a good lead in the overall, and all of a sudden, whether it was his team falling down or Adam, yours moving up, but you ended up moving into the championship slot. And at the last second, I can't believe we didn't touch on this yet, but the last second, I got a text from Yancey Eaton saying, "Whoa, look at this." And because of the stats that were brought in from the postponed game, the Miami Mets game, that nobody was sure what was going to happen, if they were going to play, on that Tuesday or that Monday after the season ended, or if they were going to finish the game or not. They decided to wipe out the 9th inning, end the game at the end of the 8th, and all those stats went in. It bumped him up I think he was like a half or 1 full point below you. Did enough to bump him up. So you have to share with Yancey. It was an exciting time to kind of see in those last 2 weeks to kind of see. Looked like somebody was running away with it. Nope. And this is what can happen. And this is what happens in Roto. Like you said earlier, it is a grind. You can work your way back up, even in a short period of time at the very end.
Yep.
All right. As I alluded to earlier, that is going to do it for episode 143 of On the Wire. Thanks for listening. You can follow myself on the Twitter at @ADGray. That's all spelled out. Kevin is at Hasting Kevin. Of course, follow the pod at On the Wire Pod and message us if you want to join any of our other listener leagues moving forward. I'd like to once again thank our guest Adam Lazarus for joining us this week. And after all that, I am Adam Howe on behalf of Kevin Hasting. Thanks for listening, and we bid you goodbye.